So I came across this tweet the other day and it hit a little too close to home. I'm not sure when or why being smart became part of my identity, but it did. Maybe it was because I watched Vsauce or I read books as a kid. Maybe for you, it was because of a gifted and talented program, or because of teachers reinforcing the idea that you were different to all the other kids who like to, have fun. Even if I can't remember when I started feeling that way, I definitely remember when it stopped. I was lucky enough to go to university, something that I'm really grateful about. I learned a whole bunch of things, made some really good friends, and generally think I emerged a better person. But foolishly, I decided to go to a university where I was middle of the pack. What was I thinking, right? And I had to deal with the fact that I wasn't necessarily quite as smart as I might have thought I was beforehand. And if you've clicked on this, you probably have a similar story of some kind. It might have been earlier on or later, but at some point you had to come to terms with the fact that your natural abilities weren't going to lead to you coasting through life, and that you weren't just a temporarily embarrassed genius. And sometimes that can be a little difficult to deal with. But through my time looking into this topic, both researching and reflecting on my own personal experience, I've come to the realization that there may be a few misconceptions that we've made about how academic development and progress should affect the course of our lives. Things that I want to share with you. I think a lot of us have a broken idea of knowledge and where it should come from. As a kid, you get asked the question and you either get it right or you get it wrong. Education on the whole is seen as something that's pretty individualistic. You either know the answer or you set out to find it out. And if you're exposed to this enough, you end up just learning that that's the way you find out things. And the stories we're told of historically intelligent people perpetuate this as well. An apple fell on Isaac Newton's head and he developed his theory of gravity. Not that he himself credits a number of other scientists, or even that he was accused of plagiarism at the time. I think it's really easy to romanticize the idea that smart people work out things on their own, and that the chain of logic works in reverse too. You aren't smart unless you can work out things on your own. That's what it means to be intelligent, right? You need to be able to solve all of your problems alone, and to some extent, that's where your sense of identity can be derived from. I know I had this idea, and I think it can permeate life at large. My idea of intelligence for a long time was synonymous not with my problem-solving ability, but rather my ability to tackle life challenges without needing to ask for help. It's a bit silly when I put it into words, to be honest, and it can make it really difficult to ask for help, or rather accept help, even when you know you need it. Knowledge doesn't ever arise in a vacuum, whether it's academic knowledge or life skills. Everything we know is built on, to some extent, the work of others. There aren't any prizes we get for dealing with problems alone, and I think life gets a little easier when we acknowledge that. Inevitably, at some point, you have to lean on the wisdom of others to better understand yourself. There's a cost kind of associated with all knowledge, whether it's time or experience, and you can pay that cost entirely by yourself, or you can share the load. As we get older, we transition into a phase of life that has a whole different set of challenges. There's no easy way to rank ourselves amongst our peers. We're more focused on seeking an overall sense of purpose, and we're constantly faced with questions that don't have an immediate correct answer. We transition from an environment where we have clear right and wrong answers to one which is effectively a sandbox game. We might end up in a place where even if we're doing the so-called right things, we don't necessarily feel that way. And for some of us, it can accumulate in a deep sense of disillusion, a feeling that we don't necessarily have a particularly strong sense of self or who we are. The only markers we have are the ones left by the people who've lived life before us, but they also just feel less and less relevant today. We're more and more bombarded with messaging that tells us that even if we do follow the right life path, we might not be happy at the end of it. And sometimes you might just feel like you're doing a pretend version of being an adult. As a stereotypical gifted kid, it can be hard to do things that don't paint you immediately in a positive light, things that challenge your identity. It can be hard to ask questions and face your own inexperience and just end up falling into avoidance. And it can be really easy to believe that if you don't have the answers now, then you never will. When your whole identity is built on being able to make sense of things that other people can't, it can be really difficult to handle uncertainty. We've never really learned how to handle things that don't make us look smart, and life inevitably throws those things at you full speed. This is a case where I found solace in the internet and being reminded that plenty of other people feel this way. And even if I think I've missed out on certain developmental milestones, it's not necessarily the end of the world. While this is my experience, there are a lot of other things that we could consider that go beyond the scope of a short internet video. For example, the fact that academic performance might mask mental illness at an early age or other neurodivergence. At the end of this, the main conclusion I really found was that you can't necessarily reason your way to happiness in life. It's not something that can be solved on purely theoretical grounds, and at some point you have to pay the price of experience to figure out where you find meaning. Living life with a kind of moral belief that you're going to have it easier isn't going to do you too much good. And at some point you have to accept the fact that in order to gain knowledge, you have to pay the price of time and experience. And that you, like everyone else, is in the process of paying that price right now. I also think it's somewhat of a privilege to be able to ask ourselves these kinds of questions at a relatively young age, because for many people, they don't have the opportunity or the incentives to ask themselves those kind of questions. We have access to a wealth of information and experience like never before, and it can allow us to really challenge ourselves at a much younger age and really face those big questions before we feel far more stuck than we might feel right now. Hi, I just wanted to say thank you to my patrons. So thank you to Sarah, Stephen, Regan, Blueberry, Khan, Chris, and Michael for your support. Hugely appreciated. Thanks so much.